Hi, I'm Matthew McCabe. Welcome to Miracle Voices. Each episode, my co-host Judy Scutch-Whitson and I will be delving into stories of forgiveness, healing, and transformation that have come about from integrating the principles of the book A Course in Miracles. If you want to learn more about A Course in Miracles, visit www.acim.org. If you'd like to visit Miracle Voices site, please go to www.miraclevoices.org. Now here's your program. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Miracle Voices podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Judy Scutch-Whitson, and our special guest today, Diane Brook Gusic. I think I got it right.
You did.
Welcome to you both.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Thanks ever so much, Matt. It's good to be back again.
Well, I'm really excited about today. I want to jump right in and introduce Diane and also just kind of find out her background. So with that, Diane, maybe you could just tell us just a little bit about yourself and how you found the course, how it came into your life.
You know, I think without being consciously aware of it, I've been a searcher forever. And when I was thinking about what to say this morning, it occurred to me, how does a searcher know to search? I came in kind of scratching at something without knowing what I was looking for. I was a voracious reader, especially when I was younger. And I became a high school English teacher. I believe because I thought if I read enough books, I would figure out how you're supposed to do life. I think that's what was really going on for me. But I was hungry for something. At a certain point, I read about a famous astrologer in Manhattan. At that time, I lived in New York. And I studied astrology. And for somebody with a fairly scientific, traditional college background, I found astrology to be jaw-dropping. I still find it to be jaw-dropping. People who did astrology kind of banded together with the wonderment of how could it be possible that this works? And I remember one day seeing their wonder and sharing it, and also thinking, and I said it out loud to someone, there has to be a larger umbrella than this. So I did what any good Virgo would do, looking for a larger umbrella. I found a good numerologist. And I studied numerology. And there's a backstory on that we don't need to get into, but the numerologist that I found and eventually studied with and eventually became partners with happened to be a man who was very instrumental in Judy's life, but that's a whole other story. At any rate, this numerologist, his name was Kevin Quinn Avery, we shared an office in Manhattan on 61st and Park Avenue. And one day I walked out onto the streets of Manhattan, standing in front of the office on 61st and Park, which if you're a New Yorker, you know is a very busy, well-traveled, pedestrian and car, noisy street. And I said out loud to a God I did not believe in, "Don't leave me here. I know that there's more." At that point, I was also taking a class with a woman named Eve Weir, who said that her very good friend, Judy Scutch, was giving a talk on something called A Course in Miracles. I thought it was a course in healing, a course in miracles. And since my hands get warm when I feel empathy towards someone, I thought maybe I should be studying healing. So I went to Judy's lecture and I sat where I usually sit in the front row. I'm not a shrinking violet. I've done a lot of lecturing in my day, but I also don't look for attention, especially in a large room. And as Judy was speaking, I'm going to cry. The room disappeared and I saw swirls of color. And I said out loud, interrupting the lecture, "I'm home, I'm home, I'm finally home." And I don't think, ever consciously heard the word home before. I'm home, I'm home. I dove into the course deeply, and that's not something I do because I'm a cautious personality. But it happened that in that lecture was a woman who was a yoga teacher of mine, and she said, "Oh, Diane, I didn't know you were interested in this. I have a great teacher. Come study with us." We lived on Long Island at the time, so he gave classes in Long Island. I studied with him once a week there. He gave classes in Manhattan. I went into Manhattan with him once a week to take those classes. And within 3 weeks, he said, "Diane, there's going to be a big lecture. Ken Wapnick is doing it, and you're ready for it." Well, of course, flatter me, and I'm there. So I went to see this man, Ken Wapnick, and everything just stood still. I just knew I wanted more of this man and more of the teaching. And I need to say, because I think it's important, because I think a lot of people get lost where I got lost. I came in as a scholar, not a major scholar, but I was a studious young person. I thought the course was something you were supposed to study and learn, like maybe mathematics or something. So I did what I did. I studied and I learned, and the words came very easily to me. I didn't have a clue it was something you did. It was something you actually experienced. Should I keep going, Matt?
Yes, please.
Okay. I made a very close friend. She wound up being a wonderful, wondrous course student and a wondrous teacher. Her name was Emily Andrews, and she passed about maybe 10 or 12 years ago. But when Emily was a young woman, in the process of doing the course and not related to it, she had divorced her husband on very friendly terms, but she had divorced her husband. And she took her youngest son, who was still living with her, and they went to live in the home of another course student who had invited her, that when she left her husband, she could do that. And somehow it didn't work out. And so Emily called me and she said, "Diane, could you please help me move? I can't stay here." And so I said, sure. And I took my car and went to help her move. And she said to me, "Please help me to see this differently. I don't want to feel anger or resentment. I want to remember who this woman is who had invited me to stay, and now I'm no longer welcome. Please help me not to get lost in my fear." And I just stopped and I went, oh my goodness, she does this course. She doesn't just study it. And that was my first clue that this was a course of action. It was, I can't tell you how startling it was to my basically intellectual personality that this was a course you did, like lacrosse. It just amazed me.
Wow. So talk a little bit more about what happened with your first encounter with Ken, and what how the teachings kind of unfolded, and what your kind of highlights you learned from him that are with you today.
Ken had enormous respect for the body of the material. And he understood it, in my view, it doesn't make it a fact, but he understood it better than anyone I've ever known, I think, the body of the material. He made it very clear that A Course in Miracles was what it was. It wasn't just like any other path. It was unto itself, not better, not worse, but unto itself. Sometimes I go back and I listen to early Ken tapes. And he really, well, his teaching deepened and did change. he really was essentially saying the whole course from the very beginning. Only I selectively took in as much as I could absorb. I think it was the same way with reading the course. You can't possibly embrace and live every word unless you're really ready over and over and over again to release your guilt and fear, which means you need to be in touch with your guilt and fear. And if you've perfected your defense system, and I had perfected my defense system, I was a nice girl. I was the good girl. If you've perfected that, you really can't be loving because your fears and your guilt are overwhelming. So slowing down enough to get in touch with my reactions that were not loving, and stopping and being willing to see differently took a long time for me. And might I say, in my experience as a teacher, it takes a long time for probably 98% of the people who come to the course. It's a process. The basics of the course are done in the atonement process. And the first step is recognizing I'm not at peace. That wasn't part of my upbringing. That wasn't part of what I presented to the world. So I think what Ken had was something I'm still developing. He had enormous patience, the way Jesus must, with all of us, as we replayed our defense systems over and over again till we could really get to a point where we might understand that there just might be another way of seeing, and that I, of myself, couldn't possibly find it. I mean, Ken spoke the whole course over and over again. I don't know that there's anything he particularly said, except every time he presented material on the course, I heard it differently because my defense systems perhaps were a little lower. But I also thought with amazement how he could say the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And he always said it differently. It was always fresh. He clearly was just open to a different way of explaining it till finally you weren't so afraid that you could let it in.
Diane, I'd like to jump in. It's Judy here.
Hello.
Hello, my love. Because we have been friends for a long time, and a good long time, meaning it's been the best of friendships. And I have heard you speak of Ken and your particular feelings about how he affected you in his teaching. And of course, I have known Ken for as long as you have, in a different way.
Yes.
And I just wanted to remark and see what you have to say about this. In the beginning, almost sounding like I'm quoting something, right? In the beginning, in the beginning of the course, it was thought by Helen, who was a co-scribe with Bill Thetford, that we were supposed to have a group of people, about 7 or 8, she thought, who would live in isolation and practice this material. Understand it, read it, study it, but practice it until our teaching would be the demonstration of A Course in Miracles, not the intellectualization or even going through the intellect to study it. That, of course, did not happen. And it became clear to us it would not happen. But that was the thought in the beginning. I don't like to suppose what could have happened if, because I think things unfold exactly as they are according to the higher plan. But the way you talk about Ken, he was already in his early days starting to do that. So that
Yes.
I think a lot of his teaching was through demonstration. What do you think about that?
I think a lot of his teaching was through demonstration. I think if he weren't, and when you say through demonstration, it means to me that in the moment, certainly in the moments he was teaching, which was the primary way I knew him. I also knew him privately, but he had released any guilt or fear so that what he was pure love and a conduit for that love, so that to each person that he spoke, his message was always, you are guiltless. He would hear your story. If you were really taking it very seriously, he might say, oy vey, or he'd kid you. He let you know that he didn't take it seriously, but he recognized that you did. He had a way of dealing with each of us that said, I see your guiltlessness. Let me help you here where you might be stuck. As far as living and perfecting the course before it was taught, and yes, I think Ken, in large measure, one reason he was the teacher. I mean, let's face it, he was not the likely candidate to be a teacher. He was a very bright man, but he stuttered. He wasn't the likely person to be a teacher. But I think because he had recognized the material, he put it on like a comfortable, well made to order suit. He wore it so comfortably. He was the ideal teacher. I believe it was Helen who said when she read this material, thank goodness now there's something for the intellectuals. I don't think it's a mistake that A Course in Miracles comes in the terms that it comes. For me personally, so careful I am. I could never have put my toe in the water of a system that said, you're love, I'm love, only God is real, let's be loving. I would have gone, huh? It would not have made any sense to me. I needed the safety of the concepts just as concepts until I was safe enough to start using the concepts. I think that that's one of the gifts of the Course, is that it does come with words and concepts that are only to be absorbed and then put into use. But this is an avenue for people who are clearly bright and concept-oriented. If not, they could go to some simpler system that says, be kind to your neighbor. Ken used to say to us, be kind to your neighbor is the truth. The Course tells you why you don't want to be kind to your neighbor. Not everybody is looking for that kind of information.
And how to be kind to your neighbor.
Yes, and how to be kind.
Can you tell us that a forgiveness story that happened in your life to you or about you that impressed you about how important the process of forgiveness is in the plan of atonement?
Yes, I want to preface it by saying when I started to understand the concepts, I said to myself, this is really great stuff. I could never do it with my mother or my father or my husband, but this is really great stuff for a lot of people. So I think I'll tell my mother's story, at least initially. I had a very beautiful mother. She was a showstopper, so that when she walked into a room, heads turned. She was vain, and she was probably immature, but I adored her. She was very critical. Poor woman gave birth to this intellectual kid who wore glasses from the time she was about 8 years old. And my mother's criticisms often were about what I looked like or how my hair looked or what I was wearing. She was a fashion plate. She really was quite stunning. And for many years after I was doing the course, and even after I was teaching the course, there was no way I was going to do this stuff with my mother, my father, or my husband. My parents at that time lived in Florida, and I lived in New York, and I would visit them once or twice a year. I was, by this time, a woman. I had a child. I had a family. And my mother would always say something, and I would feel criticized, and I would either go into a huff or get angry, or she would say and I would react. And one day I was going down to the pool. It's funny because I remember exactly where this took place. It was so important in my life. I didn't see it coming, but I had absorbed a lot of the course concepts, and I had worked them with other less immediate people. I was in my mother's living room, very close to the bedroom, so almost in the hall. And there was a beautiful statue in front of me. And my mother took one look at me. I was in a bathing suit with a robe thrown over me. And she said, "Is that what you're wearing to go down to the pool?" And in that moment, I could feel myself beginning to bristle. And then all of a sudden, maybe it was so much practicing the workbook or practicing the course with other people, I got it. She wasn't being critical of me. This beautiful woman was terrified that she wasn't good enough. She was terrified that what she had made, her daughter, wasn't good enough. She was terrified. It was a call for love. I got it in a non-intellectual whoosh. All of a sudden, I saw my mother differently. And I looked at her and I started to laugh. And you know how when you laugh and it's an inclusive laugh, my mother was waiting for the reaction. What's wrong with my bathing suit? You're always, she was waiting for the usual stuff. It was a laugh that included her. From that moment on, I'm not really a crier, but it does bring that up in me. From that moment on, my mother and I laughed. She never stopped criticizing me. To the day she died, she had something to say about my hair or my whatever. We laughed. Once I saw it, it was if it was an entirely different scene, and I really could see her fears. I could see her call for love. We laughed every time she criticized me until the day she died. It was such a gift. I used to say, if this course did nothing else for me, that healing meant so much to me that would be enough. It was Beautiful. A very important shift.
Thank you for that. Beautiful. That's exactly what we all need to hear. I, as well as Matthew, as well as all of us, we all in situations like that, whether it's a partner, a mate, someone we work for, a sibling, a friend, or someone who just triggers us on television.
Yes.
We all need that. And the fact that it turned into such all-inclusive laughter, I think, is a perfect forgiveness story, because what happened in that moment? There was a shift in your perception from the way you responded to it, which was your fear, to just complete love. The laughter was a symbol of the love. So you went from an attitude, years held, of being fearful of her criticism, of her reaction to you, to a place where you totally and completely accepted her as she was. She didn't have to change. You changed. And that's what we talk about when we talk about the shift in perception. from fear to love. So thank you for that story. Now I'm going to treasure it too.
It was sometimes on something I'm reading online, someone will post a picture. And if you look at it one way, you see one thing and you can't see anything else. You can't see anything else. And all of a sudden there's a shift in the way you're looking at it. And what you were sure was the head of an eagle turns out to be the face of an old lady or something. It's that kind of shift once it happens. And what I think I didn't realize was every time my mother criticized me, I reinforced that I was not good enough. I really believed that. And once I realized it was her fear, there was such an expansion in my owning my own self. It really was a very important story for me.
It's lovely. Were you going to say something, Judy?
Oh, I was just going to echo your lovely. We treasure these stories, which is why we have this podcast. We treasure these stories because I call it the course in action. Of course, the action takes place within our mind, but it's still, we're looking through a certain lens, which the course is teaching us through our study of it and our going through the workbook. That's what it's for. But it's little by little getting into, I'll call it the habit of these thoughts of non-duality, particularly where we know we are all one. We get these little evidences or these miracles of forgiveness, we can call them, that keep us going, that inspire us, and that also are transferable to others. That's what I love about it.
You know, Diane, one of Ken's teachings I was listening to on YouTube, which I do from time to time, and it was a big aha moment for me. It was, I don't know, a few years ago, and he was in the middle of a lecture, and he goes, Jesus is speaking to you, not you, a person, but the decision-making mind. And I was like, to that point, I was lost in the ideas and the concepts, like you mentioned.
Yes.
And it just hit me all at once, like what he was saying, like, oh, right. I'm not a body. I'm this mind. And I have this choice whether to see duality or see with the Holy Spirit. And I was wondering if you could talk about that at all, how you think about that, the decision-making mind.
I remember the first time I heard him say that when you're reading the Course, Jesus is never talking to you personally, but he is talking to the decision-making mind. And I, a teacher, raised my hands and said, I don't think that's really true. The nerve. I didn't get it. I don't know when. And Ken, bless him, didn't contradict me. He never made me wrong. He said, keep reading. The entire course is directed at a mind which is making a choice. If it's making a choice to remember, it sees everything through the eyes of acceptance and love. If it's making if you're having any other experience, you're seeing through the mind of separation. Jesus is always talking to the decision maker. Either you're going to choose the right minds or the wrong mind. What I identify with here, is already a result of a decision I've made. I get that. And it does remind me of a story that I tell often, that when Ken was very sick and dying of cancer, and his staff looked sad because he looked different. And he said, why do you look so sad? I'm not going anyplace. I'm not even here. I personally do not find it helpful to tell myself that I'm not here. I don't even find it helpful most of the time to tell myself that we're all one, because it's not how I experience life. I find it very helpful when I'm not at peace to say to myself, how could I see this differently? And I'm not saying it to myself. I'm saying it to that expanded part of my mind, the Holy Spirit, Jesus. It's very interesting. I don't know why sometimes I do say it specifically to Jesus, and sometimes I say it to the Holy Spirit. It's all one and the same. But I find it very helpful to say, how could I see this differently? I don't find it helpful to plaster on, we're all one, I love you. That doesn't work. But when I'm caught, I know I could see this differently. I could see peace instead of this, and I don't know how. I do find that helpful.
Yeah, that's very helpful. When you're caught in the throes of, let's say, in like an ego backlash, or you know that you're reacting with the ego, it's uncomfortable, maybe there's a relationship flare up. Do you have something that I kind of think of as the stop, drop, and roll they taught us in school when we were a kid? When you're on fire, you stop, drop, and roll to put out, extinguish it. Do you have anything like that in the course where how you integrate it when you're in that moment of ego and there's this flare up and there's this anger or disappointment or depression? How do you kind of recontextualize that to take a step back and feel more centered?
I can remember many years ago when I lived in New York. I no longer do. I'm actually in Portland, Oregon right now. But when I lived in New York, so early years in the course, and sometimes I'd be very angry about something. And very angry to me means justifiably I could get, at least 5 friends to witness that I was right and whoever I was angry at was wrong. And I'm a walker, so I would walk. And I can remember walking and thinking, it's my ego, I'll let go of it when I please. In other words, I'm not letting go of it.
Yeah.
For the most part, I would say that that's not where I am anymore. It has evolved on its own. When I have an ego attack, and I certainly have them, very, very much less frequently and without question for much less duration in time. But I think there's part of me that longs for that feeling of peace and joining. And it's no longer comfortable for me to sit in it and hold on to it for the most part. Every so often there's an exception, but the exception might last a day as opposed to 2 weeks or a month, which when I first came to the course, it could last. I know I could see peace instead of this. I know I'm never upset for the reason I think. I know that. And I know what it costs me to keep that peace away and how quietly releasing it is when I let it go. So as quickly as I can, I come back to being open. I know the answer already exists. And if I need a little ego time, I try not to beat up on myself.
Well, I mean, if you can cut it down from weeks, months to a day, that's a massive improvement.
It's a massive qualitative difference in the way I experience every relationship in my life, from the most superficial to the most intense. I really know I have a purpose. It's different. I have a puppy dog whom I adore. He's actually not a puppy anymore. He's about 2.5. But we do daily walks in the park. And after a while, you get to know the regulars. And there's one man who walked there, and I overheard him in conversation with someone else. And I recognize he has a different political stand than I do. And he has, and which would have been enough for me to cut him out of my, I certainly wasn't. But it's recent, and I don't want to cut anyone out. He has a dog whose on a wheelchair. Obviously, the dog has some kind of arthritis or something, but he's a big, ungainly guy, and he walks with his wheelchair, and he brings him faithfully every day to the park. And one day he made the comment to me that people don't want to pet the dog because, he's in a wheelchair. Well, I go out of my way when I see that dog. He's so happy to see me, to pet him, to love him. It's just a heart open place that I just wouldn't have had when I started the course. Why does it matter? Because I feel more connected. That's why it matters. I feel more connected.
That's a great story. The political thing is a real quack. It's a real briar patch.
Tell me.
And I've talked this with other course students about this. And, in this last presidential election, it's like, I'm trying to be in the course mindset to let this go and not be upset about it. And I'm like, when I dismiss this other person because they have an opposing political view, I'm sure they're looking at me like I'm equally backwards.
Absolutely.
And I'm on Team Coke and they're Pepsi. And in my mind, I'm screaming why Coke is better and it's different and you don't understand. And I'm just like, oh gosh, I've got to drop the whole thing altogether. And it's hard to do that. It's so hard to do that. But it's worth it. And now I've gotten to the point where I'm saying now, like every time I think I'm right about it is when I just have to put down the shield. Like I just got to put this down, the sword and the shield, because it's so unsatisfying to be in that place. I know what you're talking about. And the politics is still so fresh post-election. So Diane, I understand you have one more forgiveness story about a relative.
I do. And it's an interesting story to me because I'm not certain that the good feelings were reciprocated. I'll never know because he's passed now. But he was someone that my husband was very close with. And we saw a lot of him and his wife, and I'm still very close with her. He was by anyone's standards, so I had my witnesses. He was a difficult man. He had a very strong temper. He had very different political views. He was very vocal. He was a bit of a bully. And for whatever the reason, nice girl Diane stood up to him, opened her mouth, was very verbal, did a couple of public skirmishes. It's such a wonderful feeling for the ego to have witnesses telling you that you're right and somebody else is wrong. So that was the essential relationship I had with him. Not good by any standards, but we were close because my husband was in partnership with him in a business that involved many, many people. And one day at a public event where there were many of these people present, my relative introduced me to one of these people. And he said, this is Diane. And and he knew that a lot of people didn't like him. He said, she just tolerates me. And he sort of laughed. And to my absolute amazement, what came out of my mouth, I was a longtime course student, what came out of my mouth was, I don't tolerate him. I love him. Something shifted. I never again went back to anything but recognizing his fear and call for love. Well, the interesting thing was something shifted in me. And after he died, fishing for a compliment, I said to his wife, whom I trusted, I think he saw that our relationship had changed. And she kind of hedged, and she said, well, maybe. And I got from that she felt that he hadn't seen a change at all. And initially, for a minute and a half, it bothered me. And then I thought, it changed for me for years. That's all I need to know. I felt that was important.
It is important. And I'm so glad that you told it and told it that way too, Diane, because it reminds us that all things are lessons God would have us learn. We don't need feedback from the alive
Yes.
or dead person that they agree, oh my goodness, look what a change in her. She loves me now. It's only in our minds. And when we can accept that as a gain, and when we can see that as with much more than a modicum of peace, we can rejoice because lo and behold, we are that other person.
Yes. Yes. I am not even sure until this moment I had gone that step, but it feels so different when there's a shift. It's so strengthening because what's really going on is I've let go of a big piece of either my own fear or my own guilt. And I don't have to understand it intellectually. I just have to be willing to see his call for love.
Yeah, it's so important to hear these benefits of forgiveness because, when I was first starting out, I'm like, is it going to be this hard all the time? It seems like I'm beating my head against the wall here, and it doesn't. It's so big. It's like Everest, and it's gotten a little easier. But I wanted to ask, what do you think the benefits of long-term forgiveness are, Diane?
Where I sit on a day-to-day basis, I think to myself, I have so far to go. Am I ever going to get to a point where I really know? And then I think about where I was when I first came into the course. And if anyone had told me I could come to this much strength, grace, and lovingness, I would not have recognized the person they were talking about. I am so grateful for whatever guilt and fears I've let go. It is so strengthening. And you are hearing a very, from birth, fearful, defended person speak. And I don't identify that way anymore. And what a grace that is.
That's great. That's great. Well, that's probably a wonderful place to end unless you have any comments or questions, Judy, or you do, Diane.
I was thinking exactly the same thing, Matt.
Okay.
Like, cut.
Well, Diane, thanks so much for coming on the show today with Judy and I. It was wonderful to hear your miracle voice. So we wish you the best, and thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening today. Please subscribe to Miracle Voices by hitting the subscribe button on your podcast app. If you are enjoying these conversations, please consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever podcast app you use. And lastly, please visit us at miraclevoices.org and join our newsletter so we can stay connected. Until the next podcast, I want to leave you with my favorite course quote, "When you want only love, you will see nothing else."